So hello everyone and welcome to this talk on neuroplasticity. Sorry I couldn't be there today, but hopefully you can still get a lot of benefit out of learning about what I think is the most exciting element of recovery from persistent pain, which is this brain function of neuroplasticity. So what we're going to do today is we are going to look at why neuroplasticity is the key to improving your pain. What are the principles of neuroplasticity that you need to know? And then realistically, how can you use those principles of neuroplasticity in your own life? So that's the important part. How do we take the theory of this kind of science and how do you apply that into your own kind of recovery plan from chronic pain? So what I like to do to start with, because you are 1 week into your 2-week program, is I like to talk about what your win has been for this week. So hopefully Christy can hand out some post-it notes, and what we're going to look to do is on that post-it note, write down what you feel like has been your top win for this week. So it can be really tiny or it can be massive. It can be about, maybe something you've learned, or maybe an experience you've had with the physios, or it can be something random. Doesn't matter, but as long as it's a positive win, write it down. And then what I want you guys to do is just feed that back to the group, because if you can bring that kind of positivity into this session, it's going to really help with what we're talking about with neuroplasticity. So once you've done that, come back and play the video. Okay, awesome. Hopefully there were some good wins in there. All right. So what I want you to do to start with is I want you just to turn to the person next to you and just have a conversation and just see, okay, what do we think neuroplasticity is? So I've got some clues there. So it must be something to do with the brain. And I've got another clue there. Does he mean like plasticine? So I'm not going to give you any more information there. Some of you might know it, but chat to your neighbour. And then what I want you to do is bring that back to Christy, what you think it is. So once you brought it back, press play on the video. Okay, awesome. We're back. Hopefully you guys have said something to the extent of the brain can change, or the brain is adaptable, or the brain can be molded, and that's very much where the plasticine comes from. If anyone's played with Play-Doh before, you know you can mold it, you can shape it, you can make it into anything you like. So neuroplasticity then is the brain's ability to adapt, reorganize and form new connections in response to learning, experience or injury. And that's a very kind of wordy way of saying essentially that your brain can change. And this is really, really good news for pain. If you take yourself back to last week and you remember, okay, well, where does pain actually come from for all humans? Well, it comes from and it's produced by our brain and nervous system. We might have different drivers of that pain experience. For example, it could be injury, it could be a sensitive nervous system, it could be from changes to your nerves, but essentially all pain is produced in the brain, all completely real. So if your pain is produced in the brain, well then that means that your pain can change, and this is exactly what the concept of neuroplasticity really allows us to do. So again, this is really important as well, because prior to you coming to this pain program, if you haven't been to a pain program before, you've likely gone through the what we would call the acute medical system. So that might have been GPs, that might have been physios, that might have been chiropractors, osteos, that might have been pain specialists, that might have been surgeons. And for a lot of people, they're told these kind of things. So maybe they've gone to a surgeon and they said, look, we can't do anything for you. You're going to have to just manage this. Or maybe they've gone to lots and lots of different people, lots of specialists, lots of, different people for different things. And they've actually kind of said, well, there's nothing really we can do for you. Or you might have also been told that you'll always be in pain. And these things, they might have been subtle, they might have just been something that a healthcare professional has said just on a whim, maybe when you're walking out the door, but these things are the things that we stick with us, and these are essentially beliefs that we take on about our pain. And of course we believe it because these guys are the professionals, and these guys are the people that we trust. And so it's very, very often that you can come into a pain program with some of these ingrained beliefs that, look, I've got chronic pain, which means I'm going to have this pain forever. And a lot of people have on top of that, well, if I have chronic pain, well, it's never going to get any better than this. And if that's the case, then how is that going to make you feel? Well, it's likely going to make you feel disempowered. If you've gone around lots and lots and lots of different things, you've done exactly what you've been told to do, the physio exercises, you've taken the medication, you might have had the surgery, but yet the pain's got worse over time. So how's that going to make you feel? Disempowered. You might have reached the stage where you're feeling hopeless, like nothing else is going to work for you and your pain is never going to go away. And then those type of experiences can either make you sad, angry, guilty, all of these negative emotions, anxious about the future. But really, all of this kind of comes together and it creates the feeling of being stuck. Like, I'm here, I've tried all of this and it hasn't worked. What am I going to do in the future? But here's the good news. And this is what we're going to talk about today. And this is what I really, really want you guys to take home from this session today, is that your pain can always change. So in order for you to understand how neuroplasticity works, we're going to have to go a little bit more technical of how the brain works itself. So I want you to think to yourself, have you ever heard the word neuron before? Some have, some haven't. So if you've ever done any Googling about pain, or especially chronic pain, the words neurons or neuroplasticity does often come up. And so a neuron is a brain cell. So just like in our body we have bone cells or we have muscle cells, in our brain we have these brain cells called neurons, and we have loads of them. So we have about 86 billion neurons, which is kind of a crazy number to think about. And the whole purpose of a neuron is to fire and wire with another neuron. So essentially what that means is a neuron's job is to connect with another neuron. And when they connect, they share information, and that information allows us to basically do the majority of what we want to do in our lives. And when a neuron connects with another neuron, we call it a pathway. So you can see here on the screen, we've got one neuron, and this is what it looks like. And then once one neuron connects with another one, it's called a pathway. Makes sense? A way to think about these connections in the brain, because it isn't just as simple as one connecting with another. We know that one neuron can actually connect with up to 1,000 other neurons at any one point. So really, we've got trillions of connections, which is just like, how do we even imagine that? And so for me, when I was learning about this, I thought of a way to visualize this as similar to a flight map. So you guys probably would have seen this before. This is all the flight paths around the world, and you can see, some of the epicenters, maybe in London and America, and we can see maybe less coming to, some of the other countries. But essentially, when a neuron connects to another neuron, they can be in any part of the brain. And so there's lots of different brain centers which do different things, and they can connect at once to lots of different areas. So this is a good way to kind of visualize if you were to have a brain scan and you were to maybe think of a certain thing or do certain things, then your whole brain can light up just like this. And actually this is a kind of visualization of some of the pathways that we have in our brain. So this is a brain scan here, and it shows, all these different colors. These are all connections that can occur. So remember, when two neurons connect together, they form a pathway, and we can have trillions of connections. So our brains really are amazing at what they do. So another way to think about how this process works is an example like this. So you can see here just a street, pretty standard street, and you can see a man here. Now, let's imagine that for me, this is my route to work. I walk to work and it probably takes, 500 meters, and I walk the same way at the same time every day. And you guys probably would have had this experience where you actually pass someone on the street, and if you're polite, like I was brought up to be in the UK, extremely polite, probably too polite, you always go, morning, or you go, hello, or you might just give them a little nod. And if they're polite too, they'll nod back. But if that's the first time you've ever seen this person, is that connection strong or weak? Well, it's going to be a weak connection, right? You don't know them, you've never seen them before, and it's just essentially being polite. But let's say I go down this street every day for a week, and I end up seeing this person the same time in the same place every day for a week. And every time I give them another nod. And maybe this nod, on the third day is like, here again, nod again, hi. And then maybe by the end of the week, what I might do is I might say something like, hey, what's your name? And he might say, I'm Jack. And I'll go, I'm George. Nice. Have a good day. And so that connection then gets a little bit stronger. And let's say I do that every day for a month, and the same person is passing me by, and each time the connection's getting a little bit stronger. Now maybe 2 weeks in, I'm asking him, okay, well, where do you work? He's like, oh yeah, I work down the street in the bakery. I'm like, oh mate, I love pastries. And so we have a little bit more in common. And let's just say that happens for a year, and it gets to the point where me and Jack, we're best mates, we're hanging out at the bakery, we're eating pastries, I've put on loads of weight, it's not good. But the connection itself has got much, much, much stronger. And we've all had that in our lives, right? Where we've gone from having a stranger that you don't know actually become a really, really good friend or a close friend. And so that's very much how a neuron and a neural pathway works. When they first fire together, it's a weak pathway. They don't really know each other. But the more that pathway is fired and wired together, so the more it's stimulated, the stronger and stronger and stronger it gets. So that's going to be quite important later when we talk about pain, but also when we talk about having to try and break some of these connections. So here's a video that I'm going to play, and it's a really good one just to show how neurons communicate together.
Neurons communicate with each other, relaying messages throughout your body and powering all of your thoughts and actions. Neurons talk to each other using both electrical and chemical signals. Messages start as electrical signals traveling rapidly down a neuron. These signals are called action potentials. When they reach the gap between two neurons, the messages need some help to get across. The information is transformed from an action potential into a chemical message, which crosses the gap called a synapse. The release of those chemical messengers can trigger an action potential in the neuron on the other side of the synapse, conveying the message onward. Or it can quiet the message. This happens over and over and over. And with repeated activity, the synapse gets stronger, so the next message is more likely to get through. That way, neurons learn to pass on important messages and ignore the rest. This is how our brains learn and adapt to an ever-changing world.
So that there's a really good video, and it shows really the key concept that over time, if those neurons are fired repeatedly and over a long space of time, that they get stronger and they actually adapt and they become bigger and are more efficient. So just like after a year's worth of walking past Jack, we're best mates eating pastries, the same thing goes with your neurons. So, well, what do we actually use neural pathways for? So if you imagine your whole experience in life, we use our brain for everything. Okay, so everything comes through our brain. So all of our 7 senses, they come into our brain and we try and figure out, okay, what's going on. And we use our brain to do everything like walking, moving, speaking, learning, remembering, how to feel, driving, for example. And the way that the brain works, as you now know, is that to do any of these activities, neurons have to fire with other neurons and they create these pathways. So you're going to have in your brain a pathway for walking, a pathway for speaking, a pathway for remembering, and you're also going to have pathways for the different feelings and emotions that you experience. So if you're someone who's a really happy person, your pathways inside for feeling joy or for gratitude, they might be much, much stronger than someone who is maybe experiencing depression, where their pathways for that emotion are going to be a lot stronger. And so this is really important because a lot of these things that a lot of these pathways that we have built, essentially, we build when we're really young, and then we use them all the way through our lives. And the more that we use them, the more ingrained they become. And the more ingrained they become, it means the harder they are to break. So you guys in the education room now, if the fire alarm went off now, it's going to be very unlikely that you just forget how to walk. Because you've done it so many times in your life, thousands and thousands and thousands of times, you have put one step in front of the other. You don't have to think about it, you just do it. And that goes for the majority of what you do in your day. Actually, scientists have shown that you have up to 95% of your day with these pathways that just fire without you even having to think about it. So, a good way of thinking about, well, how do you go from not being able to do something to actually being able to do something? And then what's the process that actually happens in your brain? Well, we're going to talk about driving. So what I want you to think about now, we're going to do a bit of an exercise in the group, is I want you to think about what was the difference between your first driving lesson compared to then after you've been driving for a year. So I want you to, as a group, come up with some of maybe the emotions that you were feeling on the first lesson, but really, what did you have to do? So if you've never been in a car before, it's your first lesson, and now you obviously take all of this for granted when you get into your car, but what do you have to do? Sitting down, seat belt, mirrors, all of that intricate detail. I want you to think about what it was like for you on that first lesson. And then I want you then to contrast that with a year later and then see, okay, well, what's the difference? So once you've done that, have a group discussion and then come back to the video. Okay, amazing. So hopefully you guys would come up with something like this. So on the first lesson, you might have been feeling nervous, you might have been excited. I certainly was pretty nervous, I was quite overwhelmed as well. And really, to get into a car for the first time, you really have to do so many things all at once. So if you remember, you'd have to go in, you'd have to sit in your seat, you'd have to find the right seat position, you'd have to put your seatbelt on, you would have to then find the clutch if you were driving in manual. Which foot to use, how to use it, how hard to push it in, which one's the brake, which one's the accelerator, where's the gear stick, which gears and what movement is that. For me, when I was learning, I had to look down at the gear stick, very dangerous. And then you have to look in the mirrors, okay, well, how do I do that? And all of this is just before you even start driving. So the whole experience of that first lesson can be really quite taxing on your brain, and it takes a lot of brain power. So if it was a long time ago, you might have maybe forgotten how you felt, but for me, I really remember that after I had my first lesson, I got home and I was absolutely done. I had nothing left. My brain was like fried, and that's because I'd concentrated so hard on not crashing the whole way. So if that takes a lot of brain power, what happens after a year? Well, hopefully you guys would have maybe spoke about the fact that after a year of driving, you become a lot more confident. You also, all of these things that you really had to concentrate on in the first lesson start to become automatic or like second nature. You don't really have to think about it so much. It might be the case now that after a year, when you're driving, you're daydreaming, you're singing, you're chatting to the other person in the passenger seat. And so what happens there? Well, this takes a lot less brain power. And the key thing here is that after a year, things have become automatic. So stuff you used to think about, you don't have to think about it anymore. And so what is this actual process then? Well, if you are consistent with driving, let's say every day for a year, what you're doing is you're stimulating that exact neural pathway for driving. So just like you have them for walking, for speaking, for your emotions, for driving, you've got a specific neural pathway. And what happens then is the more that you stimulate that pathway, the stronger and more efficient it gets. So you can see here in this diagram, you can see this one looks a lot stronger and more efficient than this one. Okay? If that pathway is stronger and more efficient, it means that you can do it quicker and you don't have to think about it. So think about how many things you have in your life during your day where you have strong neural pathways for. Some examples might be, for example, brushing your teeth. You would have learned that as a child, but you've probably kept the exact same technique and routine up until where you are now. You probably use the same hand. You probably use the same technique. You might start at the bottom, you then go to the top. You probably have a very similar time, and you're daydreaming whilst you're doing it because you don't have to think about it. And the more that we kind of really think about it, we have so many of these strong neural pathways for what we do in our day. And the concept is that we can have things that work for us with these neural pathways. So for example, brushing your teeth, that's a good habit to have, but we can also have things that work against us. So things like maybe negative thinking, maybe it might be protective movement patterns. And when you have pain, you unconsciously bring with you a lot of these habits, ways of thinking, feelings, actions, behaviors that through no fault of your own have now become quite strong in your brain and nervous system. So going back to the car, when you first start, the reason why you're not very good, and if you're like me, there's tears coming down your face, that's probably an angry dad, is the reason why you're rubbish is because there is only one neuron firing with another neuron. So just remember, when Jack's walking down the road, I've never met him, I'm being polite and I'm just going hello, but it's a weak connection. But the more that you practice, the more that connection gets stronger, and you can see here, more neurons are firing with other neurons, and you get to a point where you create something called a neural circuit, and this is where things become unconscious. So just like brushing your teeth, just like getting out of bed the same way, just like your movement patterns, okay? And you get to a point where you can be doing this on the highway. This is me listening to Taylor Swift. Thought I'd just put that in there. Okay, first principle for you. Nerves that fire together wire together. And what that essentially means is what you focus on gets stronger, faster, and easier over time. Okay, here's a short video that's going to help you visualize what actually happens within the brain and give you a bit more context for that.
For many years, scientists have thought the brain was fixed and hardwired and couldn't change after childhood. But recent research shows this is simply not the case at all, and we know that people's brains can change well into old age. In fact, our brains change every day. Our brains are considered to be plastic or pliable, and this has helped neuroscientists coin the term neuroplasticity. So how does neuroplasticity work? Well, think of your brain as a huge city with thousands of roads and lots of traffic. Some of these roads are faster than others, with lots of traffic moving quickly and easily. These roads with all their traffic represent our established ways of thinking, feeling and doing. Every time we think, feel or do something in the same way, we strengthen this road, making it faster, and it becomes quicker and easier for our brains to travel this pathway. But by contrast, if a road wasn't built well in the first place, or becomes blocked, or we think, feel or do something differently, we start to use a different pathway. If we keep using that new road, our brains begin to use this pathway more and more, and this new way of thinking, feeling or doing becomes automatic. In the meantime, the old pathway gets less and less use and weakens. In other cases, it may be possible to repair or rebuild a blocked pathway. This process of rewiring your brain by strengthening existing pathways, making new ones, weakening old ones, and repairing broken ones is neuroplasticity in action. It is important to understand that neuroplasticity is not good or bad. It is just what the brain does.
Okay, awesome. So you can see there, from this visualization that this is a ever-changing process. So depending on how you think, how you feel, what you act and what you do, these connections are always changing. And this is why, people's personalities over their lifetime, they can stay the same, but a lot of people do change, You have changing relationships, your beliefs change with new experiences. And so this process is happening all the time, when you wake up to when you go to bed. So a really nice thing that you said at the end there, which is so true, is that neuroplasticity is neither good or bad. It's just something that happens. So our brains are all wired to work this way. The more that we do something, the stronger it will get. So it's not thinking whether it's, whether we should be doing this, whether it's going to negatively impact on us. It just does it. And this can explain actually why, we can form things like addictions or bad habits. The brain doesn't think whether it's good or bad, it just does it. Okay, and it's a function of our brain that we've learned to survive with. Okay, so why are we actually talking about this topic, and how does it actually relate to you guys there in the education room sat there watching this video? Well, the reason is that we all have neural pathways to experience pain. So no matter where the main driver of that pain experience is coming from, whether it's from an injury, maybe it's from your sensitive nervous system, or it's maybe, like I said, an injury to the nerve, it doesn't matter where it's coming from, all pain is processed and experienced in your brain. And that's not to say that pain's not real, because all pain is real. But as you can see here, the signals to experience pain travel all around your brain. So there are lots and lots of different areas of your brain that are triggered and used to actually experience pain. And so, for example, there are parts of your brain that are going to look at your memory. So have you been in this experience before? It's going to look at your, for example, your amygdala there, so your fear response. So what emotions are you experiencing in the moment? And then it's going to bounce around and then form essentially the experience of pain. And so if we have neural pathways for pain, then remember, neuroplasticity is going to happen if you experience pain for weeks, months, and years. Because every time you experience pain doing a certain thing, it's going to be stimulating that pain circuit. And so for people, this can actually help them make sense of how pain has got worse, yet for a lot of people, maybe their body hasn't actually changed, or there hasn't been, a worsening of an injury, or maybe their scans look the same, or maybe their scans show normal age-related changes, and people are left kind of confused as to why their pain has started and it was maybe a bit more manageable, but now maybe a lot of people might be experiencing, months and years down the line, more flare-ups of their pain. The pain has become more intense. Maybe it lasts longer. Maybe there are much more restrictions on what they can do physically. And maybe the pain has started to move and grow. So it might have started in their back, but actually it's now growing up towards, their shoulders or their neck or down their legs. So this can be helpful for people who haven't been given that diagnosis, or they haven't been given that clear maybe reason as to why, their pain has got worse, and they might be feeling inside, well, there must be something more serious going on. But for a lot of people, we now know that with persistent pain, if those pain circuits are stimulated over time, if you have pain every day, for example, then it's going to get stronger, it's going to get more efficient, and it can get to the point, just like after a year of driving your car, that you don't have to think about it and pain comes on. So essentially this comes down to this kind of principle. So the longer that you experience pain, the stronger that neural pathway for that pain experience becomes. So just like in this example here, you can see that this pathway here is stronger than the weaker pathway. And so just like your brain learns how to drive, your brain can learn pain over time. Remember, neuroplasticity, this whole function, is neither good nor bad. It just does what it does. It just strengthens whatever is being used. Okay? So let's take an example then. So I'm sure a lot of you in the audience here today will have some sort of back pain. Back pain is very, very common. Most people experience it in their life. And if you have persistent pain, and that's a source of your pain, if you think about when you first started experiencing back pain, maybe it was an acute injury, maybe it was an illness, maybe it was something that just came on. But when you went to maybe bend over, it was painful, but maybe you could do a little bit more. But maybe over the months and years, you've had multiple experiences of you bending and getting back pain. And maybe it's getting to the point now where every time you bend, you know you're going to get back pain. And for some people, and this is very common, it might be the case that even if you think about bending over and picking something up, especially if you bend over and think about picking up something heavy, you get that pain experience before you even move. And so this can be branched out to a lot of different areas of pain. But essentially, over time, through this process of neuroplasticity, your brain can start to associate certain things you do with danger. And therefore, if it's dangerous, your brain is going to protect you with pain. And so that's how a lot of people can go from, maybe having manageable pain in the acute to getting to the point now where, your life is completely changed because of that pain. And you're stuck in this kind of experience where I go and do anything and it's painful. So don't worry if you're getting to the point now and you're thinking, well, that sounds like me, and this is all super depressing because, I'm getting to the point now where, I'm doing everything and it's painful. So what are you telling me? You're telling me that I've got these pathways in my brain. That means I'm always going to have pain. That's not the case. So the really, really good news, and this is where neuroplasticity is amazing, is the fact that by engaging in new thoughts, new feelings, new behaviors, and new actions, i.e. by making changes, we can weaken those existing pain pathways and we can create newer, healthier, non-painful pathways. And this is a good experience maybe to go back to what your win was for this week. So often in these sessions, I might have people talk about, for example, having exercises from the physios to actually release the muscle tension, and then I'm actually feeling less pain when I'm sat down. Or it might be, for example, I've learned this breath work exercise which actually helps to calm my system and I generally feel less pain and I feel a little bit better. Or it might be in the pool, I actually experience much less pain and I can move a bit more. So all of these experiences that you're starting to have are starting to weaken those existing pain pathways and create newer, healthier, non-painful pathways. And how does it do this? Well, this is the second principle and the last principle you need to know about neuroplasticity, and that is the principle of use it or lose it. So with pain, and with your neural pathways in your brain and nervous system, like I said, they're always changing. They're never just staying the same. And I'm going to show you a video now of these little cells called microglia cells. And they look like aliens. Some people are freaked out by them. But this is a real process that happens in your brain. And this is actually a real microscopic example of this. But what you're going to see is that the pathways that you don't use, so if it's an old pathway and you do something new, those old pathways are not just going to stay there. They're actually going to be taken down and what's known as pruned. So pruned away. So this is where one neuron meets another neuron. And you're going to see this microglia come up and prune away some of these pathways that aren't being used.
Called microglia are the brain's caretakers, clearing away invading cells and damaged tissues. But it's now believed they also trim away the unused connections, dismantling any connections that aren't being used, and so saving precious energy.
Okay, let's go back to that. So you can see here, okay, this is happening in your brain at a microscopic level. But for people that are told that the pain can't change, the pain's always going to be the same, and you're just going to have to make do with what you've got and just, accept that this is going to be it forever. Those people who are saying this don't know the science of how pain actually works. These can be your pain pathways, and if we make changes, this is the exact process that's going to happen, whereby your brain is going to dismantle older, non-used pathways. So for a lot of people, this is like a light bulb moment where they go, oh wow, this is happening when I do the breath work. This is happening when I change the way that I walk. This is happening when I release tension and I feel better. This isn't just magic. This is a real process that happens within your brain. And the key thing is, the more that we repeat this process, the stronger those newer pathways are going to become, and the weaker those older, painful pathways are going to become. So this is how people can go from being stuck, feeling in pain, to having a new approach, a new way of doing something, a new thinking pattern, new feelings, new behaviors and actions, and then they have that process over weeks and months, and then they become a new person who experiences much less pain, and they get to a point where they're much happier and have a much better quality of life. And that process is happening within your brain. Okay, it's not some magic thing that happens, and you're doing that yourself. So with this process, it's very clear that if nothing changes, nothing's going to change. So if you have these pathways in your brain, a lot of them have become unconscious, so you don't think about them. They're always going to be triggered unless we have new thoughts, new feelings, new actions, and new behaviors. That's how people change. And hopefully by 7 days into this process now, that's making sense for you, and you are actually experiencing a little bit of change already, which is awesome. So you can see from when you first had pain to up till now that these are pathways in your brain that we're going to now consider the old pathways. So we're going to say thank you for getting me up to here, but now's the time for change, because without change, this process is just going to keep on going in the background. So we're at a crossroads now, and we're actually kind of in a crossroads in the program where we've done the first week and now we're transitioning into the next week, and we're starting to get our mindset towards going home. And going home is going to require a bit of a plan and a bit of a daily action, which I'm going to speak about in the moment. But just bringing you back to basically a zoomed out version of where you are now and the expectations of going forwards. So you might be here at the moment in phase 1, 2-week program, of course, and on the left hand side here we've got improvement in pain, function and quality of life, and at the bottom we've got time. So what will typically happen is you'll come for phase 1, you will build up your skills of awareness, you'll get a plan, and hopefully you've got some ideas of how to settle some of the pain and then actually start to recondition and retrain that pain system in your body. After you finish phase 1, you're going to go back home into your home environment, and hopefully what will happen is you will come back for phase 2. And what you can see here is this line of progress isn't straight. And so for me as a clinician working with not only people with persistent pain, but anyone in a rehab setting, I've never ever had anyone who's just done this. It's always this process of improvements, stagnating, improvements, decline, improvements, stagnating. So do expect that when you go home, that it's not going to be a smooth, easy ride. It's going to have bumps in there, but they are normal. And let's say you come back for phase 2 after having a bit of a slump, after having a bit of progress after phase 1. Just think where you are from when you first came in, and it's always progress. So maybe you come to phase 2, and then after that, we're basically seeing, okay, well, what worked for you? How was your plan? How was your function? And then what do we do next? So that week will be focused on the next step forwards to look towards improving your quality of life, reaching your goals that you want to achieve. Then you go home, and then maybe you come back for a refresher in 6 months or a year, or maybe less, depending on what you need. And again, it's all about basically seeing where you are, seeing what you need, getting support from us and going forwards. But ultimately, the whole goal of the whole process is get to a point where you are self-managing. So you are at the center of your care, you have a support network around you, but you're the one calling the shots. And that is essentially building up your skills in all these different areas of pain management and improvement. So this is the process that we do see people go through, and the people that have a good, strong daily plan can come in at phase 1 feeling stuck, feeling hopeless, all of those things that we spoke about earlier, and get to a point where enough time has passed and enough repetition has passed that they get to a point where they're self-managing and their quality of life and their function are much, much, much better. That also brings me on to what to focus on when you do leave here. Because from my experience and the other staff members here, if you purely just focus on your pain as your main target, so for example, you want to go, I'm a 8 out of 10 now, I want to make it down to a 3, that's not necessarily the best use of your energy and your focus. Why is that? Well, as we know, with persistent pain, pain fluctuates daily. Okay, and so it's quite difficult to build a plan around something that's constantly changing. And this is why you're coming to realize that actually a lot of what we do here is focused on function. And what I mean by function is stuff that you can do physically, stuff that you can do mentally, and the stuff that you can really try and work on every day and see good results. So that might be the walking plan, that might be the settling exercises, that might be the journaling, that might be the breath work, the things that you can control yourself. And so if you can focus on that after enough time, then you are going to be able to, improve your function enough. And then what we always see is that pain kind of comes down with that. So like the many people that have gone through this process and other pain programs in the world, and they have, built their awareness, created a plan, had support, and reached a stage where they're self-managing, how does this process work? Well, this is how neuroplasticity works. So this whole process of getting where you want to be, retraining your pain system, this is neuroplasticity at work. And this is why this concept is so important for you guys to not only understand, but just keep on remembering. Okay? When you're making changes, when you're improving, this is neuroplasticity. This is your brain changing. And once your brain changes, and it changes enough, you create your new normal. And you can get to a state where pain is much less, your function is much better, and it kind of opens up your life again. So, really just thinking then, how do we create this process of neuroplasticity? Well, you're probably already doing it over this week. But my advice to you, and just like the other staff members here, is to use what you've learned to create a daily plan. Bring yourself back to that first driving lesson. If you are in that first driving lesson and you said, right, okay, I'm going to give this a month, and by the end of the month, if I'm not a professional, I'm going to give up, and you come to the end of it and you're still kind of, stalling from time to time, you can't parallel park, so you just give up. What will happen then is that you will lose all the benefits of those new pathways being built. If, for example, you give yourself, right, okay, I'm gonna see this as a long-term thing where I'm gonna try and basically carry on improving my driving for years and years and years to come, well, then you're gonna get to a stage in years to come where you're much, much, much better. And where does that come from? That comes from consistency. And so, to start with, when you leave this program, what we recommend is you pick 1 to 3 things that have worked for you the best so far, and you want to basically put those into your daily plan. Why is this? Well, when you're here, you're bombarded with so much information, you're giving so many new experiences that a lot of people leave and they go, I need to change my whole life, I need to change this, I need to change my work, I need to change my location of where I'm living, I need to move countries, I need to blah, blah, blah. And that's all great, but if you change too much all at once, ultimately it's going to be too much, and you're going to fall back into those patterns of what's normal to you and what's natural. And we don't want that. We want to create change. And so picking the 3 things that have worked the best for you, and remember, these can be as small as a 5-minute breathwork routine in the morning. That can be one of your things. Or it might be, I'm going to do my physio exercises at 9 a.m. every day. So it's not massive things, but they're small but impactful things that are going to start the process of making change. And once you're consistent with that, maybe when you come back to phase 2, this is when we can start to then add things on. But to start with, you're going to have to make sure that what you pick is convenient, it is realistic, and it can slot into your daily routine easily so that you can be consistent with it. Because if you pick a load of things and you think, I should do this, I should do that, Shoulds are only done when it's convenient to you. And convenience doesn't create consistency, and consistency is the only thing that creates neuroplasticity. So you've got to think, I'm going to pick 3 things, 1 to 3 things, and I must do them. So it has to be something that can be realistic into your routine. So what I want you to do now, this is the end of the talk now, I want you to just have a little 2-minute think of what those 3 things are for you so far. Now, remember, you're only a week in and you've still got a week, so you might be struggling for 3 things. That's absolutely fine. But there definitely will be 1 or 2 things that you've tried so far that you would think, okay, this is going to go into my plan. And these might be things that you're already doing, but you might have realized that actually, no, these things are my most important things, so I'm going to prioritize them more. So, have a little think, and then what I want you guys to do is come back as a group and voice the things that you guys are going to put into your plan so far, with the understanding that things might change over the next week. With that being said, well done for completing the first week. Hopefully you guys have got a lot out of it, and you've got another week to come. Keep working hard, keep that concentration levels high, and I hope that you reach exactly where you want to reach.